At this point, I've sewn the center long row and attached 3 hexagons on the outer side, and I have 1 more hexagon to attach in this position, and I want to show you how you sew 3 sides, as I'll need to do right here to attach that one. First of all, you want to fold your hexagons right side together like that and take a securing stitch right here. I've already tied 1 knot. I'm just going to tie 1 more tiny little knot and I'll be ready to sew. This is where a lot of people do the whip stitch across the edge of those 2 pieces with them folded like that. But that way of stitching this is visible from the front side, and I feel like that the ladder stitch, to me, it's a little easier to do, as well as it's the fact that it's invisible. So I like to lay the hexagon or the shape flat like that and put a binding clip to hold it in place, and then I can turn this complete set of hexies over and stitch my ladder stitch. So I'm going to hold it in my hand in a way that's comfortable to me. A ladder stitch for these 2 seam allowances here will be stitched in this direction. For me, I'm right-handed. You can fold these other hexagons if you need to, if your piece is too large to lay them flat. And you're going to stitch into the seam allowance on one piece, and then you're going to hop over to the other piece, moving directly over from the point that your needle came out of the previous seam allowance, and that's what calls this a ladder stitch. These stitches that connect the 2 pieces are fairly straight across from each other, and the other stitches that are in the seam allowance are invisible. Your stitch length doesn't have to be tiny. It can be a little less than 1/8 of an inch, about a 1/16 of an inch. And it's so easy to slip between the fabric and the paper because your fabric is not glued to that paper. We'll give this a little tug when we're all finished to tighten those stitches completely, so I'm not too concerned about them not being tight enough to close everything up. And when you get to the corner, you want to come out right in the tip of the angle, and then go straight across to the other piece right in the tip of the other piece's angle. So I've finished this one side right here. I'm going to give it a slight tug to tighten those stitches up, and then I'm going to secure that with a small little knot. I like to secure the tips of those angles when you sew those together, just for security. Now we're ready to move on to this unsewn edge right here, and we're just going to continue. We're going to do this side, secure the tip there, and then continue on up to this point, and we'll be finished with this piece at that time. So to start this side, I'm just going to hop over to the opposite side and keep doing the same thing. And you kind of pull those shapes together. If you find there's a little bit of a gap, don't worry. You can just pull them together at the end with a slight little tug. The straw needle helps so much in sewing with this fine thread and to make these stitches invisible. Here's our finished piece. Look how nice and flat it is. I'm very happy with the way that that little ladder stitch makes everything nice and invisible. Now, because these papers are meant to leave in there, the whole piece just feels a little bit like it's stabilized nicely. I plan on leaving those in, although you know they will wash out if you're going to wash your project, but you could take them out at this point if you wanted to. I have a sample right here of one of the hexagons with the paper in it, and look how easily it'll come out. You just peel that back and take it right off, and because we used starch on the seam allowances, everything will lie nice and flat like that. So if you would rather work this into your project without the papers in it, feel free to take those out. Because of the way that we stitched, we did not stitch into any of the papers, and they won't be attached. That way they'll just pull right out. But I'm going to leave mine in place, and it's all ready now to attach to my project. I have my bag top and bottom sewn together with a seam that runs underneath where my applique is. And I've placed my applique right over that seam, centering it, and I glued it down just a little bit with a few dabs of glue from a glue stick. So if you have a glue stick from a previous Maxi Mail box, by all means use that, because it helps to not have to contend with the pins on the outer edge of your applique. That helps a lot. And you get your thread tangled in those pins at times. And speaking of thread, if you also have the Thread Magic from a previous Maxi Mail box, pull that out and run your thread through that, because it helps so much when you're traveling doing applique and handwork to help your thread glide through the fabric, and it helps it from getting tangled and having any static. And this is polyester thread, so it's extra helpful for that reason. This is the bobbin thread that was supplied in your box, and that's what I'm sewing this down with. So I've brought my needle up from the back side, and I'm going to work on this piece right here, so I'm going to rotate my work just to make it easier to do this stitching. So from the back, I brought my needle up and barely caught about 2 threads on the side of this gold hexagon. And I'm going to go down now into the back, and I'm going to place my needle in so that it is directly into the back, or the brown fabric there. It goes directly into that fabric at the same point that it's coming out of the gold hexagon. In other words, I'm not traveling to make that stitch. I don't want to travel from the front side. Go down and do your traveling from the back side. Come up about 1/8 of an inch further down the edge that you're stitching. Grab just a couple of threads, and then back into the back and travel up. Grab a couple of threads, and if you do it this way, your work will be invisible. You won't be able to see your thread at all. This fine thread that we're using, this bottom line, helps so much to make your work invisible when you're doing applique and handwork. I'm just going to continue all the way around and sew all of these edges in place. Now you could do this stitching by machine if you like. You could use a straight stitch on your machine and work just barely inside that fold. Remember, you have a seam allowance back there, so you could work within 1/8 of an inch from the edge if you like. You could use a decorative stitch on your sewing machine, or you could use decorative thread and a long straight stitch. You could do that by hand with embroidery thread with a big stitch around the edge. Just use your imagination. If you don't want to try invisible applique like this, just sew those on in any manner that you want to. Thanks for watching. Happy sewing, and God bless.